Good morning, and welcome to the latest edition of Shooting Straight with me, Voice of the Forge. As always, I will be shooting straight from the lip. This is completely unscripted and unwritten. The only preparation that goes into these shows is research, and then I let it percolate for a while in my tiny little brain, and then talk about the feelings, reactions, and the deeper repercussions of such information. Now, for those of you who are wondering why I call myself Voice of the Forge, I belong to a group of gamers, all of which have some issues, mainly mental health issues, social anxiety issues, and that kind of thing, and I have these issues as well. This is part of my therapy where I talk to a computer. I know that I am talking to no one in particular, but at the same time I'm still getting my voice heard, and I put it out there so that other people can hear, and it kind of gets me over my anxieties. Part of the reason why I do this is I do have a history in public speaking and mooting, and it's something that I am quite confident in doing. My issue isn't so much speaking in front of crowds, it's the getting to and from venues. My issues relate to being out in public where there's a lot of strangers, and the reason I call myself a Voice of the Forge is the fact that the group is called Forgotten Forge Games, and that is how it was branded when we started. Now, the reason for this video is something of a strange one, because it connects something old and something modern, and it is another video that does take into consideration what has been said and disclosed by Unsleeved Media, The Quartering, and the information that has come out with regards to the judge program in Wizards of the Coast's judge program for Magic the Gathering. And I do make the point linking Wizards of the Coast to the judge program specifically because they have tried to distance themselves and hold the judge program at arm's length and say this is nothing to do with us, this is a fan-made organisation, whereas they basically call the shots. Without Wizards of the Coast there would be no judge program. There may well be some fan program with regards to running tournaments for Magic the Gathering, but without WotC, Wizards of the Coast, WotC's support, then there wouldn't be a tournament prize, there wouldn't be a Grand Prix, there wouldn't be the professional tier of players. Now, the reason why this is somewhat different is the fact that I am linking this to something that happened a long time ago. And when I say a long time ago, I'm talking about an interview that took place on the BBC in 1991, long before Magic, good couple of 3 years before it hit the UK, right? And this was an interview on a TV show called Wogan. And for those of you who don't know who Wogan was, Terry Wogan was a very famous broadcaster for the BBC, both across television and radio media. Most famously, a lot of people will remember him for his coverage of the Eurovision Song Contest for many, many years. And he ended his career, I do believe, broadcasting a radio show for BBC Radio 2. I think it was Breakfasts where he finally ended up before the end. Now, the reason why this is cogent is one of the guests that he had, and the guest in particular that I'm referring to in 1991 is a gentleman called David Icke. Now, when this interview took place, this was an interview where this guy had come out and basically said things like he was the son of the godhead of the universe, and that the colour of the universe, or something on those lines, was turquoise. And there were a number of things that he said, one of which was that Saddam Hussein wasn't appearing in his television broadcasts that he was dead, and you had people impersonating him, and it wasn't, and people laughed. I mean, this was a mean-spirited interview. You can go and find this interview online, and you can see that the guy is. The interview is an uncomfortable watch today, and I remember watching this and thinking that this guy is absolutely off his rocker, and I was a little bit uncomfortable at the time because yeah, it was a little bit like going to the asylum and poking fun at mad people. But at the same time, this was someone who I believe had been a footballer and had a certain cachet, a certain reputation um, in public life beforehand through sport, and then he'd come out and said these rather strange things. Now, fast forward 26 years later, he's now a best-selling author. He regularly fills multiple thousand theatres with his talks, and whilst I don't agree with everything that he says, and I do believe that some of his ideas are quite wacky, he was ahead of the curve when it came to things like exposing paedophiles. Like he long before anybody else said that Jimmy Savile was up to no good. He outed prominent politicians like Sir Edward Heath, sometimes known as Ted Heath, in 1998. He wrote a book that was published in 98 called The Biggest Secret, where he named individuals who were part of an elite that he said ran the world. Like I say, you've got to take some of what this guy says with a barrel of salt, but he has said some things which, when you look at them with hindsight, have been more or less correct. And he had a huge expose about paedophiles, which sold well as a book, but didn't gain much traction until much later on, when the ITV documentary on Savile aired. And I want to link these two. I want to link the fact that you've got someone who may not be the person that you want to be, the messenger, that may be saying some outrageous things and may be a bit of a dick. No question for who I'm talking about here. Now the thing is, one of the things that David Icke said, that I think is absolutely spot on, is that the greatest freedom that we can have in a society is the freedom to be wrong. Let that sink in for a moment. The freedom to be wrong. What does that mean? What that means is that if you do not have the freedom to be wrong, then you have to be right. And if you have to be right, then someone has had to set the standard. Someone has had to say what is right. And if you have had someone say what is right, then you have had a system of ideals, of facts, of all kinds of things, which if I were to go into would be a whole half-an-hour show just on its own. But you get the idea that if you have to be right, then someone has basically delineated what is right and wrong, and you can't stray out of the lines of that box. Now that's ideological totalitarianism. And that is exactly what we are seeing with Wattsie's reply to the unsleeved media, the quartering debacle. And regardless of what you think of the guy, at the end of the day, let's look at what actually happened. The guy gets banned for allegedly, and so far the evidence has definitely seen that this is unfounded harassment claim, and the evidence hasn't backed this up at all. And in fact, one could say that she actually gaslit her community into donating to her through an act of fraud, if we're going to be ungenerous, because she'd already been accepted into nursing school. That to me seems rather disingenuous, and I would be inclined personally, but I'm a slightly more vindictive arse. I would actually turn around and say, well, hang on a minute, Patreon, could you please look into this? I think that you've been scammed. All these people have been told a mistruth, an untruth, to make them part with their money, to make them feel sorry for her, and in fact it's all been a ploy to get her education paid for because woman. But that's by the by. That's just my take on her. And if you noticed, I haven't managed to mention her. You all know who she is. I don't need to mention her. Just as you don't, I don't need to use his name. You all know who I mean when I talk about unsleeved media and the quartering. What I'm trying to say is that he started off looking at WotC's terms and conditions, which are a massive, massive overreach, their code of conduct and their term of service. And they set a dangerous legal precedent if we actually try to follow them. And he went, right, okay, if you're going to do this to me, do you apply the rules consistently? There's nothing wrong with that. He's turning around and said, right, if you're going to ban me for bad behaviour, let's have a look at the rest of the bad behaviour in the community and let's see if you do something about it. Let's see if you've actually got the intestinal fortitude, you've got the mental courage and the strength of your convictions to actually uphold the rules which you set in place for everyone. Or are you, as I suspect you are, and here is me paraphrasing the quartering, ideologically opposed to certain people and certain ideas, i.e., is this more of an ideological ban because of what I say, rather than me being a bit of a dick? And that is why the hashtag and the email address was WotC asked for this at gmail.com. And he basically got people in the community to email him so that there was a centralised campaign so nobody could be accused of brigading or dogpiling or sea lining or any of the other made up words that came from Gamergate for when people actually turned around and in their hundreds went, hang on a minute, that's not right. And actually started thinking rather than just accepting what they're told from their masters and their overlords at WotC. So, long story short, there's evidence that starts coming in that there is a far worse problem than just partisanship. And what he does is he does some research, and he does something that journalists are supposed to do, which we don't see a lot of nowadays in the papers. Now it's all X Factor and Gladiator and, oh look, Celebrity Big Brother and all these distractions. There's not much of the way in which in politics or crime or what's happening in the European Union or Sweden or Germany or the latest bomb attacks or anything like that in the rest of the world. No, it's let's sit down and see what Kim Kardashian has been up to this weekend. We're asleep, people. As a society, we are asleep. And this is but the latest iteration of a certain group of people who has a certain amount of power, this time in a card game, something that is meant to be innocent, something that is meant to be wholesome, in regards to the fact that children are supposed to be able to buy this, play this, take part in tournaments, and everybody is meant to be happy and fluffy and light. And all of a sudden you find that you have a group of people that don't want to be investigated, because that's the information that's coming forward. They don't want to be investigated because certain people have been outed as convicted, not alleged. These people have been convicted in a court, so they've had to meet quite a high standard of proof. These people have been convicted of being paedophiles, and yet they haven't been banned until after they've been outed, and still some of them still not yet. So these people haven't been banned from attending these locations where they have ready access to children. And in one tweet it does look like everyone is washing their hands at WotC and the Judges Insider programme until a kiddie does get diddled. And that is sickening. But that's the parallel that I want to draw, is regardless of the messenger, we have been given information which should shock us. We should turn round en masse and we should be emailing the newspapers. We shouldn't even be on Twitter anymore. These should be letters going to the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Daily Boston and Explorer, whatever in America. These are these things in England should be going to the Telegraph, the Observer, the Guardian, the Mail, the Sun, whoever will take them, and exposing this company for what is going on. And we should be not looking at the messenger, we should be looking at the message. And re-watching these interviews with David Icke and what he had to say, and how mean-spirited and ridiculed he was, we now look at what's going on with the magic community, and I see this replaying out all over again. And the problem is that in most of what he was actually claiming, there was some truth. I mean, yeah, I don't believe in David Icke's reptilian overlords who are Satanists who sacrifice children and everything else. But when he turns around and says that there are several hundreds of children dying every second because of malnutrition and poor governance and unequal distribution of resources, then he has a point. Just because some of what he says may seem like it's from Scientology or the back of the latest pulp sci-fi novel, doesn't invalidate everything that he says. We may take what he says and evaluate it, actually do some research. And one of his big claims is the fact that we do not live in the reality that we think we live in. And he uses the film They Live, the one with Rowdy Roddy Piper, the John Carpenter film, as an example and as an allegory. And I actually think it's quite a good one. I actually think he has a point, and this is the reason why I have mentioned the newspapers. They are lulling us into a sense of security, and we are naively accepting everything that that they say. We say we don't. We say that we don't agree with this, and then we carry on as if we do. And regardless of whether we believe it or not, if we act as if we do, then what's the difference? How does anyone tell? This is important, people. If we act as though the status quo is the truth, even when we don't believe it to be true, then what's worse? Actually believing it's true, or denying the truth? Just because the truth makes us uncomfortable is no grounds to deny its existence. And I think that what has happened with Magic the Gathering and Wizards of the Coast should serve as a warning to us all. It is the world in microcosm. We have people who have a very limited amount of power, in very limited circumstances, in limited places, and yet they have been infiltrated by some of the worst people that we can imagine. Now imagine people who have real power. Look at what happened with Clinton. Look at how it happened with Savile. Look at what happens when there is a scandal like Pizzagate and everything else that flows on from there. There has to be an awakening. There has to be something where we turn round and go, if you are campaigning for this, who benefits? Why do you want the power? Why is it that you are saying what you are saying? Why is it that you want to be in power over us? What do you get out of it? And unfortunately there are a large number of people, a significant minority, who will take what they can get and they will bend it and twist it and abuse it to their own ends, and much to our detriment. And all it takes is one person and he can do an awful lot of damage. Just look at Demolition Man, the glorious overlord that saved society after the Great Earthquake and all the rest of it, and he was the biggest villain of the piece. He wanted a total dictatorship because he thought that he knew how people should live. He'd banned anything that was unhealthy, No smoking, no meat, no fats, no salt, nothing that was bad for you. Everything that was good for you. And what did you end up with? You ended up with a society of infants. And we are being infantilized. We are being talked down to. We are being treated as if we are children and can't think for ourselves. This is food for thought. I'm going to end it there because we've hit 20 minutes. I could go on for another hour, but people don't want to listen to that. People have a finite listening span, I've found. So I will end it there. I am, as always, a voice of the Forge. If you want to get in contact with me, you can do on Twitter. I am at Voice of the Forge on Twitter. You can find me on Twitch under the same name. You can find me on Minds. You can find me on Gab AI, and you can find me on Player Me. Everything is branded Voice of the Forge. If you want to enter a dialogue or have a chat, whether recorded or otherwise, off the record or on the record, please feel free. I thank you for your patience and I thank you for listening, and I hope that you will like, distribute and possibly even subscribe. But if you take the time to listen to this, please pass it on to the widest possible audience you can. It isn't necessary that I'm saying this. Take what I say. Do your own research. Back me up. Then say it yourself. Make your own video. Tell your own friends. Get the message out there that people who have power are not necessarily going to use it for their own good, for our good, and some of them are going to have very dark closets and skeletons and graveyards indeed. So, thank you for listening and goodbye.